Have you ever spent hours crafting the perfect text message to send him? You drafted it, deleted it, rewrote it, and in the end, you sent something that felt safe, but it just didn't get the response you were hoping for. And then you're there, staring at those three dots that appear and disappear, your stomach in knots waiting. Or worse, he reads it and doesn't respond. And you're left wondering, what did I do wrong? Today I'm going to show you that the problem isn't you. The problem is that nobody ever taught you that there's a psychology behind the messages that make a man feel something real. And when you understand that psychology, everything changes. First, I need you to understand something. If you've ever felt anxious sending a text, if you've ever calculated every word, if you've ever waited hours for a response that should have taken seconds, you are not alone. And it doesn't mean you're needy, desperate, or that there's something wrong with you. It means you care. It means you're emotionally invested. And there's nothing wrong with that. What happens is that many of us were taught to be responsible for communication in relationships. We were taught to be clear, available, helpful. And so when we apply that to texting, we end up doing the emotional work for two people. We send long messages explaining our feelings. We ask how his day was. We initiate every conversation, and you know what happens? He gets comfortable. Not because he's malicious, but because the dynamic you've created allows him to be passive. And when someone doesn't need to make an effort to have your attention, your presence loses value. That's simple human psychology. There's a fascinating study from Harvard University about attraction and uncertainty. Researchers found that when someone isn't sure whether we like them, they think about us more. They spend more time trying to figure us out. And here's the interesting part. This uncertainty does not create negative anxiety when it's done right. It creates intrigue, fascination, a desire to win us over. Think about it. When was the last time you couldn't stop thinking about someone? It was probably when you weren't sure how that person felt about you. When there was mystery. When you had to work a little to get their attention. Now think, when was the last time you lost interest in someone? It was probably when that person was too available, when the messages were predictable, when there was nothing left to discover. And that's exactly what happens when you become the person who always initiates the conversation, who's always available, who always responds immediately. You remove the mystery. And without mystery, there's no tension, and without tension, there's no attraction. But here's the good news. You can change this with 3 simple shifts in how you communicate through text. These aren't games. These aren't manipulations, they're adjustments to the dynamic that make him lean toward you instead of you always leaning toward him. Let me tell you about a client of mine named Sophia. She was 32, a successful lawyer, confident at work, but completely lost when it came to texting. She'd been seeing this guy for 2 months and felt like she was doing all the work. She'd send good morning texts. She'd ask how his day went. She'd share funny things that happened to her. And he'd respond with haha or cool. She came to me frustrated. I don't understand. I'm being clear about my interest. I'm being communicative. But it seems like the more I try, the less he tries. And so I asked her a question. Sophia, what does he need to do to have your attention? Silence. Nothing, she answered. He already has my attention. I've already shown him I like him. And that was exactly the problem. She had given away the game before he'd even started playing. So we did an experiment. For 1 week, Sophia wasn't going to initiate any conversations. She wasn't going to ask about his day. She wasn't going to share random updates. If he texted, she would respond, but with something different from what she normally did. And you know what happened? On day 2, he texted, "Hey, you disappeared." On day 4, "Is everything okay? You seem different." On day 7, he called. For the first time in 2 months, he called. And you know what he said? "I missed you." Sophia hadn't gone anywhere. She had just stopped chasing. Now let's get to the first secret, the incomplete response. When he sends you a message, your instinct is probably to answer everything. Respond quickly, be helpful and clear. But here's the problem. When you give a complete answer, you close the door on the conversation. There's nowhere to go. Example, he texts, "How was your day?" And you respond, "It was good. I had a tough meeting this morning, but it went well. Then I had lunch with a friend, came home, and now I'm watching a series. How was yours?" See what you did? You gave all the information, did all the emotional work, and even threw the ball back to him with a question. He doesn't need to make any effort. Now try this. He texts, "How was your day?" And you respond, "Intense, but in the best possible way. Period." See the difference? You gave enough information to create curiosity, but not enough to satisfy it. Now he needs to ask. He needs to make an effort if he wants to know more. And when he asks, "What do you mean, intense?" you respond with something like, "Sometimes the best things come from the most unpredictable days." Again, intrigue without completion. What you're doing is creating what I call curiosity gaps. You're giving him something to chase. And men are biologically programmed to chase. But here's the crucial part. This isn't about being cold or distant. It's about creating space for him to participate. When you give incomplete responses, you're inviting him into the conversation instead of having the conversation for him. You're signaling, "I'm interesting and there's more to discover, but you need to do the work of discovering it." And that, from a psychological standpoint, is irresistible. The second secret is what I call the strategic disappearance. And no, this isn't ghosting. This isn't playing games or leaving him in the void just for the sake of it. It's about demonstrating through your actions that you have a life that doesn't revolve around your phone waiting for his text. Here's the truth. When you're always available, always respond quickly, always there. You send a subliminal message that says, "My time isn't valuable and you are my number one priority." And ironically, this makes your value drop in his eyes. Not because he's shallow, but because human beings value what they need to compete for. So here's what you do. When he texts, sometimes you respond right away. Sometimes you respond in 2 hours. Sometimes you respond the next day with something like, "Sorry, yesterday was crazy," or you just continue the conversation as if nothing happened. What you're creating is unpredictability, and unpredictability generates attention. But the key here isn't pretending to be busy, it's genuinely being busy. It's having hobbies, friends, projects, things that fill your life in a way that your phone isn't the first thing you check when you wake up. Because when you're actually living a rich life, you naturally don't respond immediately. And when you finally do respond, your messages carry more weight, because they come from someone who's choosing to give attention, not from someone who's desperate to receive attention. And here's where the magic happens. When he realizes he doesn't have your time guaranteed, he starts to value it more when he has it. He stops seeing your messages as something certain and starts seeing them as something earned. And that shift in perspective changes everything in the dynamic between you. And now we get to the third and most powerful secret, the message that creates emotional investment. This one's different from the others because it's not about what you do and say or when you disappear. It's about what you say that makes him feel seen in a way nobody else makes him feel seen. Let me explain. Most women fall into one of two categories when texting. Either they're too practical, "Okay, what time do you want to meet?" Or they're too emotional, "I loved spending time with you, it was so special." Neither creates real investment. The practical is forgettable. The emotional is scary because it's too intense, too fast. What you need is to find the middle ground, the message that makes him think, "This woman gets me in a way that's rare." For example, let's say you had a date where he told you about a work project he's excited but nervous about. Most women would text afterward, "It was great seeing you, when can we see each other again?" or "Good luck with the project." Both are nice but generic. Now look at this. Still thinking about what you said about the project. The way your eyes lit up when you described the idea, you can tell you're not just working on it, you're creating something that means something to you. That's rare. See what happened there? You didn't just show you were paying attention, you reflected back to him something he might not have even noticed about himself. You gave him a better version of himself through your eyes, and that creates a connection that goes beyond physical attraction or surface compatibility. It creates emotional intimacy. And when a man feels emotional intimacy with you, he doesn't just want to be with you. He wants to invest in you. He wants to pursue you. He wants to be worthy of the way you see him. But here's the crucial detail. This only works if it's genuine. You can't copy and paste pretty phrases. You need to actually pay attention. You need to actually see him. And when you do that, when you send a message that shows you're seeing beyond the surface, You differentiate yourself from every other woman he's ever met. Now let me explain why these 3 secrets work from a psychological standpoint, because I don't want you to do this mechanically. I want you to understand the science behind it so you can apply it authentically. First, the incomplete response works because it activates what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect. This effect says that we remember incomplete tasks better than completed tasks. When you leave a conversation open, his brain literally gets stuck thinking about it. He needs to complete the loop. Second, strategic disappearance works because of something called intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes slot machines so addictive. When the reward is unpredictable, the brain releases more dopamine than when the reward is guaranteed. So when you're not always available, every time he gets your attention, his brain receives a bigger dose of dopamine than if you were always there. Third, the emotional investment message works because of what we call the reciprocal self-disclosure effect. When you show vulnerability or emotional depth, you create a psychologically safe environment for him to do the same. And when 2 people reveal themselves emotionally to each other, the brain creates an association. This person understands me. This person is safe. I want more of this connection. But here's what all of this means in practice. You're not manipulating him. You're creating psychological conditions for natural attraction to happen. You're removing the obstacles that most women unconsciously put in the way when they try to force connection instead of allowing it to develop organically. Now, there's a mistake I see women make repeatedly when they try to apply these strategies, and I need to warn you about it, because otherwise you'll sabotage your own results. The mistake is applying these techniques without first working on your own self-worth. If you use incomplete responses, strategic disappearance, and emotional investment messages, but inside you're desperate for his validation, it's going to show. Because you'll do everything right on the surface, but your energy will be wrong. You'll strategically disappear but obsessively check if he's texted. You'll send an incomplete response but get anxious if he doesn't ask more. You'll try to create emotional investment, but deep down, be waiting for him to validate your feelings. And you know what? Men feel this. They may not know consciously what's happening, but they feel the energy of scarcity. They feel when you're doing something because you need his approval versus when you're doing it because you know your worth and you're simply seeing if he measures up. So before you apply any of these strategies, you need to do the internal work. You need to get to a place where you genuinely believe your time is valuable, where you genuinely have a life that doesn't revolve around him, where you're genuinely okay if he doesn't respond the way you want, because you know there are other men who will respond. Because when you come from that place, these strategies aren't techniques. They're simply who you are. And that's when everything changes. When you stop trying to make him like you and start evaluating whether you like him. When you stop chasing and start attracting. When you stop proving your worth and start recognizing your worth. So let me ask you something. And I want you to really think about this. When was the last time you sent a text from a place of abundance instead of scarcity? When was the last time you communicated with a man without a hidden agenda of making him like you more? When was the last time you simply were yourself, confident that it was enough? Because here's what I've learned after years of working with thousands of women. The problem is never the message. The problem is never the timing. The problem is that we were taught that our worth is in how much a man wants us. This need to prove you're desirable. But what if you change the question? What if instead of how do I make him want me more, you asked, do I really want someone who needs to be convinced of my worth? What if instead of calculating every word of every message to generate the right response, you simply expressed yourself authentically and trusted that the right man will fall in love with exactly who you are? These 3 secrets I've shared with you today aren't about manipulating men. They're about you getting back into a position of power. They're about you stopping bending and twisting yourself to fit what you think he wants. They're about you creating space for him to chase, because chasing is what high-value men do when they meet a woman who knows her worth. But all of this starts with you believing you're the right choice, not trying to become the right choice. So my final question for you is, are you ready to stop chasing and start choosing? If this video changed something in you, if you felt a shift happen while watching, I want you to do 2 things. First, leave a comment telling me which of the 3 secrets resonated most with you and why. I read every comment, and they often become the inspiration for the next videos. And second, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because every week I post new content about relationships, self-worth, and emotional intelligence. Content that will help you build not just better relationships, but a better relationship with yourself. And if you want to go deeper, I have a video about why you accept breadcrumbs of affection. That's the perfect complement to this one. It's linked right up here. I'll see you in the next video, in the next